How y'all doing? We're gonna do this together, okay? Because I don't have 30 minutes of material, so I need you. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna talk to you for 2 minutes about who I am and what I do with my organization. And then we're gonna have a participatory conversation. And I wanna start off by saying it's not lost on me where I am and who I'm with and what you all mean for the country. I don't often get the opportunity to speak to students anymore, especially not students in a place like Spelman, students from Morehouse. I've read up on y'all's history, and I'm honored to be here with you, and I hope that we can have a conversation. So I consider this the beginning, okay? This is step one, and we're gonna do this. We're gonna talk about it, but we're not gonna focus as much on the problem, because what Neil and I really do day to day is we take on the issue of ending mass incarceration. That's our task, no biggie. We're gonna get it done. We're gonna win every time. That's what we've been doing, and that's what we intend to continue to do. My name is Seema, and I'm the managing director of a brand new national organization called the Alliance for Safety and Justice. We are one of the newer organizations in the field, and probably the largest or one of the larger organizations. And our goal and our mission is to end over-incarceration, but it's not so simple. It's not just about ending incarceration. It's more of a divest, reinvest kind of model, right? Because the truth of the matter is that while incarceration and the war on drugs is a problem, ending it doesn't necessarily mean that everything's gonna be good, right? Is that gonna make everyone free? Probably not. So, that's where y'all come in. And there has never been a more important moment, at least not in my lifetime, and I don't think that there has been a more important moment in this country, and it's because of you. You know, you all have taken this weapon of technology and changed the entire game. No longer is narrative and media only controlled by the wealthy. It's now in your hands. And if you go on my Twitter, I have like maybe 20 tweets, because maybe that's something y'all could teach me. I don't know how to communicate my every waking thought on social media, and to do so in a way that captures people's imagination. But young people today have been able to do that. And so we need to build some bridges, because there's folks like us who've been working on this campaign stuff, analyzing the problem, trying to come up with solutions. But the mic is really in your hands today. So I'll just say, you know, as a way of background, I'm a mother. I have 4 daughters. My oldest daughter is actually applying to Spelman this year, so hopefully, I hope she watches this and feels encouraged, and you receive her if we can get her out here. I have 4 girls. I'm a mom, first and foremost, but I'm also an attorney. I'm a movement attorney, I'm an organizer, and I'm a documentary filmmaker. So why the law? You know, for me, the law was an abstract thing growing up. When I thought of the law, when you think of the law, what do you think of? Judge, police, what else? Constitution. What was that? Trouble. I mean, I looked around at this country that I was born in and that I was growing up in, and I couldn't understand how the law could have anything to do with a social movement. How could the law, which had been put in place to do what? What has, in this country, what's the history? What's the history for people of color, for black people, for immigrants, for disenfranchised? What else? Marginalized. What about for women? What about for black women? What about for immigrant women? What about for poor women? So it was inconceivable to me. How could a lawyer be a part of a movement. It didn't make any sense. But what I've learned over time is that the law is our weapon. When we don't understand the law, we use the law like a shield, right? We use it when we want to defend ourselves. But the law could actually be a sword. Now let me ask you a question, pop quiz. What's the difference between the Constitution and the Bill of Rights? Who knows? Constitution. Somebody, one person, raise your hand, stand up, make it up, do it.
The Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments of the Constitution in which the federal government cannot infringe upon these rights of any human being.
Give it up. Okay. That's exactly right. So the Constitution establishes sort of the structure and the authority of the government, but the Bill of Rights establishes the rights of the individual with respect to the state. Now, I believe that the Bill of Rights has the power to allow us to, for the first time ever in the history of this country and perhaps even in the history of this world, to establish freedom, equality, and human dignity as the constitutional premises of democracy. I believe that we can use the Bill of Rights and expand upon it to imagine the world that we want to live in, not just to challenge the problems, but to sort of envision the society that we're trying to build. So here's what I'm going to do. As quickly as I can, I'm going to ask you guys a few questions because I want to know who's in the room. And I want to know what you think. Because what we're really talking about here from my perspective, much love and respect to the libertarians who brought me here. Bring me other places. But I'm not a libertarian, you know. Mainly, I'm just like a regular chick who's a lawyer and a mom. And so I think about these issues in very concrete kind of ways. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think about them in terms of where I live, my kids, just sort of the practical issues, family, those kind of things. So before I begin, I want to just do a little poll here. Now, by a show of hands, and Neil asked this question earlier, how many of you have ever been stopped by the police? Now, keep your hands up if you were ever arrested. Now, keep your hands up if you or someone in your family, your immediate family, has a criminal record. Look around. So this is an issue that impacts you. Now, how many of you are a victim? Look around and check it out. So here's the thing. You know, our organization, the base that we reach to are crime victims. Now, I go all across the country with our survivor-led team. We're a survivor-led organization. And I go into rooms like on the south side of Chicago with young men on the south side, and I ask a question. How many of you have been a victim of crime? And how many of them do you think raise their hand?
All of them.
None of them. Why not?
Because you don't want to seem like a victim. Like,
Why? Why not? Because it's disempowering. So what's the value that we celebrate in our communities? If it's not victimization, then what is it? What is it? Struggle, resilience. Resilience, right? What are the kind of things your mothers and fathers told you when you were falling apart? I bet you I said all this stuff to my kids. Wait, I can't hear you. Go ahead. Go ahead. Okay. Creative. What else? Uh-huh. Oh, no. What were you going to say? Anyone else? What do we tell our children? What have your parents told you? Yeah? Oh, repeat the answers. So if you don't stop crying, I'm going to give you something to cry about. What else?
Also, like, I don't know why you're crying. You haven't experienced nothing yet. Yeah.
Yeah. You haven't even been through anything. What are you crying about? I know I tell my girls, go ahead. What now? If you go to jail, I'm not coming for you. So she said, because crying is a sign of weakness. That's deep. So basically, and I'm guilty of it too, like maybe like this morning, for example. But, self-awareness is the first step. But yeah, where we're like, shake it off, be strong, don't fall apart. It's a bad habit, right? We want our children to be strong because we're worried that the world isn't gonna receive them, right? They're not gonna receive them. Now, in that same room of young men, if I ask them, how many of you have ever been jumped? How many of you have ever been pistol whipped? How many of you have ever witnessed domestic violence? How many of you have ever been a victim of sexual abuse as a child? If I ask those, how many of you have witnessed any type of violence or been shot at? Suddenly, we see so many people who raise their hand and say, yeah, actually, I've been through that, but I'm not a victim. I'm not a victim, right? Because victimization is something that is viewed as a sign of weakness. Now, the thing is to understand about mass incarceration is so many of those policies came up in the name of who? Victims. And the government, but the victims, right? That's who they said they were protecting when they put all these tough on crime policies in place. So who's most likely to be a victim of crime? Y'all, be specific.
Black women.
Go ahead. Black men. What do y'all think? Young Black men and men of color are the number one most likely to be victims of violent crime. That being said, so much of violence against Black women and women of color goes what? Unreported, unnoticed, not acknowledged, right? So that's what's been basically built into our system. I'm gonna give you the quick one-on-one on what I mean when I say mass incarceration, or what I mean when I say over-incarceration and the war on drugs. And Neil alluded to this earlier. So the city's deindustrialized, right? When the city's deindustrialized, this was pulling out the economic stability of communities, right? These factories basically moved abroad or to other places where they could hire workers for cheaper. And slowly the United States became a place where it was cost ineffective to do business. At that very same time, drugs were flowing into communities. And you had a huge population of unemployed people. At the outset, I would argue that the promulgation of drug policies was in response to a crisis. The crisis was real. There was a time where entire city blocks, right, Neil, were decimated by addiction. Not just incarceration, but by addiction. In the 90s, mental health infrastructure completely shut down across this country. And who is the number one mental health provider today? Jails and prisons, right? If you need inpatient treatment. Now, the truth of the matter is there was a time where inpatient mental health hospitals were places where atrocities were being committed against some of the most vulnerable people. It wasn't that it was all good. The problem was it never got replaced. It never got replaced in community. Alongside the promulgation of laws that promoted long periods of incarceration were also laws that made invisible the victimization of Black people and people of color. What'd I just say? Go. So what I'm saying is, at the same time, this designation of criminal was used as a reason to disenfranchise people, to lock them up. There were laws put in place that defined who was a victim and who was worthy of healing services. What kind of laws are those? Laws that say that you're not a victim if you have a criminal record. You can't receive victim services, right? Those laws are in place today. You're not a victim if you're complicit in your own victimization. If you are not a victim, if you're complicit in your own victimization, and that can mean that you are related to or live amongst people who are known gang members, quote unquote, you have a prior history, you're on probation at the time or parole at the time that you get shot, you are not entitled to victim services. So what happens to a person when they're victimized and they don't get healing? Have anyone in this room ever known someone who's been victimized and who did not receive services? And what was the outcome? Can you give me some examples? PTSD, trauma, shut down. What else? Suicide. So, and in addition, go ahead. Yeah.
Can you explain what you mean by victim services?
Sure. So there, what do you mean by victim services? So there were millions upon millions of dollars that were collected through the federal government in response to both criminal and civil cases, right? So you had to pay certain fines or your resources were seized, et cetera. That money went into a pot and was distributed to the states. So every state gets millions and millions and millions of dollars. For example, Illinois got like $77 million last year. They spent about 60 million of it they did not allocate. The money that they did spend was primarily for domestic violence and sexual assault, but much of that money never reached Black communities and communities of color, right? So on one side, the victims' rights movement has paved the way for us to even have these resources available. On the other side, Black people and people of color have been systematically left out of that conversation. So why am I talking about that? So is my time up right now? Is it over? Or are we still good? Okay, we have 15 minutes. Okay, we're gonna do this. Okay, so I'm gonna give you the 101. So here's how it is. When you look at states across the country, 85% of incarceration comes from the state. You guys know that there's federal prisons and there's state prisons, right? Yeah. You got that. Okay, so 85% of the incarceration comes from the state. So any given state you look at, you can pretty much break the population in the prison down, approximately, right? It's usually about 60% of the people are there for serious or violent offenses, okay? Just what you would consider to be a serious offense. The other 40% of the folks are there because they have committed a drug crime or they've violated a condition of parole or probation, okay? A technical violation, not a new crime, but a technical violation. Or they've committed some type of property crime like theft or repeated property crime. So you can imagine it, right? 40% of the population is there for these non-serious offenses, but we know they can be pretty serious too. If you've ever been in proximity to an addict, you know what that can look like. And then 60% are there for serious offenses. So that 40% is the group that's most likely to be homeless, to have mental health issues, to be financially unstable, to not have access to housing. And that's the same population that cycles in and out of the prison. And ironically, the folks who are there for longer and serious offenses are the less likely to end up back in the system. So what are the laws? Here's a question for you. So there were laws that were promulgated across this country. What were they that made it harder for people to get out of prison and more people going in? What were those laws? 3-strike rule, that's one. Mandatory minimums, what else?
Drugs, seizure, as far as like the amount.
Yep, increase, or the threshold questions. What else? Come on, y'all.
Disparities for crack cocaine.
Disparities in the application. What about truth in sentencing? Have you guys heard of that?
Yeah.
What's truth in sentencing?
If you get 6 years, you gotta serve 6 years, no parole.
So it made it more difficult to get parole. Also, they passed laws that said if you're incarcerated and you have, for example, a prior drug offense, you can't get rehabilitation to get out early. A part of your punishment for having the prior drug offense is that we're going to withhold rehabilitation from you. And so that's basically it. There's 2 reasons why there are so many people in prison and it's so hard to get them out. 1, because so many people go in, and 2, because they spend so much time there. So more prisons, more arrests, more quotas, more despair. So really quickly, I'm going to talk to you about some of the work that Neil and I have done and hopefully have you jump in. So my background, longer story, but I started organizing in New Orleans almost 20 years ago when I was a college student myself. Organizing in a community. Are you from New Orleans? Yes. Oh, okay. In the St. Thomas projects at that time that was undergoing extreme gentrification, but not just that. It was the site of both extreme gun violence and aggressive policing. And so I started my work by organizing community at this moment, trying to understand how do we both protect people, but also not create an increasingly hostile relationship with law enforcement. I went on to go back to New York, where I'm from, and worked with my own community post 9/11 in the era of extreme surveillance, something that Black folks have known for a very long time, and that became a visceral and very public experience post 9/11. And then finally, I ended up in India. After law school, I produced documentary film, and then at some point, I ended up as an organizer for the ACLU. Now, when I came to the ACLU, they asked me to identify a way in which we could intervene with the school-to-prison pipeline. What's the school-to-prison pipeline?
Security officers in the schools.
Security officers, go ahead.
Black kids in schools are purposely sent to like prison for like offenses that other kids do not get punished for.
So the criminalizing of behavior of school children, and this predominantly affects Black and brown children, that results in more children ending up in the criminal justice system. Go ahead.
It's like if they're not at a certain like reading level or school level by like 3rd or 4th grade, then they're like put in the statistic like they're going to go to jail. It's like a certain statistic that 1 in how many of our children will be in jail by this time.
So we need to start creating.
3rd grade is when they start the testing to see whether or not we need to build more jails, basically.
And instead of helping them, they just keep going. They pull the kids down. And if you go to school and you know people are like the teachers are not going to be nice to you, then you're not going to want to work anyway. So like they enforce that behavior, and that behavior sends them to jail.
So it's almost like inadvertent criminalization of our youth, right? So I was asked to go and to understand how we could intervene in the school-to-prison pipeline. So the first thing I had to do was come up with a way to communicate to folks about the law. Now, most people think that lawyers are the only ones, and we're taught as lawyers that you're the one who can communicate more effectively about the law. But the lived experience is the people who have to interact with the law all the time. So how do we communicate that? Well, when I was organizing in New Orleans, there was a mixtape out with a song called The Block is Hot by, right? And we used to use that song in conversation to talk about police presence in community. So we adapted a verse from, and there's another pop quiz. Any rappers in here? Okay. Of JayZ's, the second verse of JayZ's 99 Problems. Okay, so what was the second verse of 99 Problems about? What was it about? Go ahead. Exactly. It was actually, yes, it's a brilliant exposition on the Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment. And actually, law professors have written articles breaking it down. And, if you read Decoded, you'll also read a little bit about the background. But the true story of JayZ's 99 Problems, that second verse, is that he really was, or so he says, no, he really was. Look at the camera, we're recording. He really was a drug trafficker that was trafficking cocaine, presumably, or crack, down 95, right, New Jersey Turnpike. And he was driving a car where he had a secret compartment in his sunroof, and he was holding drugs at that point. And so the story of the second verse of 99 Problems is the story about how he tries to exercise his Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment rights. Now, I won't go too far into it except to say we used that verse to have a conversation with youth across the city. And what we found is that what young people, what old people, what people across the city were saying was that they were being stopped and frisked, and marijuana was the basis. Now, just based on your own expertise, do you think white people smoke more weed or black people? How many people think this is a no judgment zone? Okay, by a show of hands, this is very scientific right now. How many of you think white people smoke more weed? Just speak your truth right now. How many people think white people? How many of you think black people smoke more weed? I mean, I'm going to just cut to the chase because I probably have like 6 minutes left. It's not white people. Black and white people smoke weed at about the same rates. Yeah. But in the District of Columbia, what we found is that marijuana was virtually constructively legalized west of 16th Street. And so that's where 4 major universities were, predominantly white universities. And so what do we know about white college kids? They like to do what? I was going to just say party, right? And so what we found was that more than 90% of the arrests in the city were of black people. And that when we talked about the distribution of arrests based on geography, people intuitively understood that it was about what? They just got it, because you understand that, right? You understand that there's certain parts of your cities that have been divested from. We understand that our cities are segregated, that race is a lived experience. And so there wasn't that same defensiveness because folks just intuitively understood. And all the explanations, well, maybe black people smoke more weed outside, turned out not to be true. When we dug into the, statistics of it and the data and the police reports, it wasn't true. And so with the help of my dear friend Neil Franklin, we decriminalized marijuana, and then we legalized marijuana 18 months later in the District of Columbia. We defended that before Congress, in fact. And subsequent to that, we took on the vice unit, and we took on the issue of jump outs, and we actually had the vice unit disbanded in the city in the District of Columbia. Changed the laws on assault on a police officer, and introduced, with the help of Black Lives Matter and the movement for Black Lives, the most progressive and far-reaching police reform bill probably that I've seen anywhere in this country in recent years, the NEAR Act, which decided to take people who are in crisis, the people most likely to be engaged in the criminal justice system, the people who otherwise police would have been focusing on for enforcement, and to lean in that moment. So what would it look like in the moment of crisis, instead of incarcerating people, is if we gave them jobs and mental health services and housing? Could we flip the whole thing on its head? I'm giving 3 minutes because I'm sure I'm over my time and there's more to say here. But I want to tell you about the work that I'm doing today with the Alliance for Safety and Justice. To me, the most incredible people I've had the opportunity to work with in the country. We're moving campaigns all across the country. And we're founded on this belief that the movement we need to end incarceration is a healing movement. It's a healing movement that centers healing of communities alongside ending over-incarceration. We're a survivor-led organization, and actually one of our leads for our survivor work is here Atlanta-based, and he wanted to be here tonight, but told me to please extend his information to you guys if you want to do work on this issue. I want to tell you really quickly about some of the work we're doing and that we've been doing, and then just leave it right there. In California, we passed 2 propositions, Proposition 47 and 57. 47 decriminalized or defelonized 5 felony offenses. It took every single dollar that was saved from that decarceration and sent it back to the communities that had been most impacted. $160 million year 1. And for every single person who had had one of those felonies, it was retroactive. So those felonies could be removed from their records. 1 million people eligible to have felonies removed from their record. Nearly 20,000 people were released from prison as a result, and 100,000 people reduced in their involvement in the criminal justice system every year. And that was our first move. And then it was Proposition 57, changing the way we looked at parole, changing the way we looked at people who were incarcerated who had committed serious offenses. What does it look to bring someone home better, in a better position than when they went in? In Florida, we're on the ballot with the incredible, unstoppable Desmond Meade, and you guys should find out. He's one of the modern-day heroes of our generation. Formerly incarcerated, became a lawyer, drafted the ballot proposition to re-enfranchise 1.68 million people in the state of Florida. Nothing like it we've seen in this country for a couple hundred years. And we're at the ballot 2018, and we need all hands on deck. In Ohio, we're on the ballot with issue 1, and it's a combination of 47 and 57. In Illinois, we passed the most far-reaching criminal justice reform bills in 2017 and 18 that are slated to reduce the prison population by thousands and thousands and thousands of people. But more than that, we brought millions of dollars back into communities that were the most harmed and the least protected. And we are just getting started, okay? We need you guys with us. So I hope that you've learned something, but I also hope that you feel like this is a movement that you want to be a part of, and we can find a way to bridge. What y'all are doing, how do we support you? Georgia is definitely a state that we plan on being in the coming next couple of years, and we just want to build with y'all. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you.